Jai Gurudev. Could we begin with 10 minutes of group meditation? So let's all sit comfortably and close the eyes. Don't mind the time. And I'll say Jai Gurudev after 10 minutes. It's a privilege to think of Maharishi in the world and all that he did, and also to engage you to think about it too. I think that you will have many insights into what Maharishi did in the world. We are all beneficiaries of that. Maharishi was born with a total passion for enlightenment, inspiring his search for the perfect master, leading him to the moonlight meeting with Gurudev, that moment which changed the destiny of the world. With one glimpse of Gurudev's face from the headlights of a passing car, Maharishi's heart was surrendered. His Brahmi Chaitanya certain, and also his receipt from Gurudev of the entire constitution of the universe. This is a painting by Francis Knight that is in the puja room of Maharishi in the international capital of the global country of world peace in Holland, showing that moment that Maharishi has spoken about when he first saw Gurudev. Maharishi said about that day, as a thirsty man arrives at a well, so I arrived at the feet of my master. The quest of a perfect master was there. The first sight of his personality was enough to make me surrender at his feet. He was the most highly revered sage in India and was held as the embodiment of divine consciousness. In fact, in one of the talks Maharishi gave about this search of his, he mentions that he visited many, many saints who came in the area where he was as a boy, and none of them satisfied him. One of them, he mentions in this talk, was actually put up to tell Maharishi that maybe he should not go on a spiritual path, but should go on the householder path. And Maharishi says, he responded to this visiting Swami, do you think that somebody else can tell somebody what to do in that regard? And he said the Swami immediately backed off and said, no, you're right, nobody else can tell you. So Maharishi already was so bold and he knew exactly what he wanted. So he'd seen many visiting teachers, and none of them had produced satisfaction for him. But then one day, someone in the street whispered to me, there has come a great saint, but he does not want to be known by the people. If you wish, then we shall go quietly one night. I said, Maharishi said, there could be nothing better than that. So I think everyone has heard Maharishi describe that particular evening There was a small house on the outskirts of the city where Gurudev was staying temporarily in the monsoon time. And somehow Maharishi and his friend went there, and the man who was guarding the door said, "Have you been invited?" And Maharishi hadn't been invited. But somehow Maharishi talked his way in, and the man went upstairs and obviously asked Gurudev, and Gurudev allowed the two youngsters to come up. And the way it was a dark night but there was some moon, but the moon was behind Gurudev, so his face was in shadow, couldn't be seen. He couldn't see Gurudev's face at all. So he sat there, he felt there was some great presence there, but after a little while, at the end of the street on which that small house was, a car turned the corner, and as it turned the corner, the headlights went across Gurudev's face. And in that one flashy glimpse of light on Gurudev's face, Maharishi said, his heart was instantly surrendered. That was the power that Gurudev possessed. And it was from that moment forward all that Maharishi was focused on, interested in, devoted to in his life. So that's how it began. And it was from that moment on that Maharishi's destiny in the world was completely set through his devotion to Gurudev. When we hear Maharishi's descriptions of Gurudev, for example, in Our Guiding Light, then I think we can see how Maharishi had received that particular immediate impact of just an instant sight of Gurudev, his master. Maharishi says, our guiding light is the ever-shining, never-setting sun of divine grace. Ever the same, constant as the northern star, and bright as the midday sun, our guiding light is the divine grace of Sri Gurudev, Mahayogi Raj, His Divinity Brahmananda Saraswati Maharaj, the most illustrious in the galaxy of the Jagadguru Shankaracharyas of India. He was Mahayogi Raj, greatest of yoga teachers in the family of the yogis of India, and was held by the enlightened, the realized, as personified Brahmanandam, universal bliss or cosmic consciousness, the living expression of Purnamada Purnamidam, the divine radiance blooming forth from his shining personality, revealed the truth of Purnamidam, and his Sahaja Samadhi, all-time natural state of cosmic consciousness, brought home the truth that both Purnamada and Purnamidam. It was the perfection of this great spiritual master which innovated a spiritual renaissance in northern India and wherever he traveled. And then later on, Maharishi describes him as his entire personality exhaled always the serene perfume of spirituality. His face radiated that rare light which comprises love, authority, serenity, and self-assuredness, that state that comes only by righteous living and divine realization. His darshan made the people feel as if some ancient Maharishi of Upanishadic fame had assumed human form again, and that it is worthwhile leading a good life and to strive for realization of the divine. Maharishi has described in other times, in other talks, that where Gurudev went, rocks would melt. That people who had very hard hearts and very much opposed to any spiritual values, only material values, would happen past when Gurudev was speaking to some vast group and listened even 15, 20 minutes and was so melted by his teaching and by the sound of his voice that they would begin to speak glorious praise of all divine qualities. Just in 15, 20 minutes, that was the reality that Maharishi described, Gurudev created. So this was what Maharishi experienced that evening. We see here in the picture of Gurudev and the headlights behind flashing across the face, and Maharishi sitting and instantly realizing he had found that great master for whom he had been searching. And we'll see as we go on in the coming weeks that what Gurudev did then with Maharishi was design a life. He designed Maharishi to take unity consciousness to the entire world. This was what Gurudev created in Maharishi. When Maharishi was saying goodbye to us, he said, "I have completed my designed duty to Gurudev. I have completed it." So this was 53 years that in the doing, but it was always designed from the level of Gurudev himself. Maharishi, inspired by this legendary master, here we see him sitting at the feet of Gurudev, made everything simple for everyone in the world. Even the experience of transcendence, utilizing the natural tendency of life to go towards more and more, to make the techniques for the evolution of life in the world effortless, easy, spontaneous, and pleasant, and immediately effective. No strain anymore once Maharishi began to teach in the world. In this way, he opened the gateway of enlightenment to everyone on earth and ushered in the dawn of a new age for the whole human race. He took the supreme enlightenment of his master, Gurudev, to every corner of the world in its completeness, which had never been done before, ever, in the history of Vedic India. And he offered that value of unity consciousness, of enlightenment of Gurudev, equally to every nationality, race, religion, to the ignorant and to the wise, and speaking this great knowledge in the language of the age for everyone to understand, illuminating transcendence through the scrutiny of science, taking it out of the domain of mysticism. Maharishi used to say it was previously garbed in the clothing of mysticism. So he completely put an end to that. Maharishi cognized the Ved as Nitya and Aparishaya, eternal and uncreated, the total natural law that runs the ever-expanding universe. And on this basis, Maharishi revived the whole Vedic civilization. There was one story from the Kumbh Mela in 1989, and Maharishi was living at Maharshi Nagar outside of Delhi at that time, but he went to the Kumbh Mela, and he took his bath there in the Sangam, And there was a saint there that Maharishi knew very well, very, very elderly saint. And he was living on a platform. They had on poles and on this vast sands there where the Sangam is. And Maharishi said he sent a group of his young Vedic pundits, just teenagers, to greet this saint on his behalf. And they were coming across the sands towards the saint sitting on the platform. And they were in rows, like a little army, going along in rows. And as they came across the white sands there at the Sangam, they were chanting the Ved. This little army of young, all in yellow costume, all together. And as they approached, there happened to be some Purusha there with the saint visiting also. And this elderly saint, when he saw this, Maharishi's group coming, Maharishi has revived the whole Vedic civilization. So this is what Maharishi has done, and of course we know what that means. In Veda, there was all scattered in different branches of Vedic literature, scattered, some of them nearly lost. And Maharishi gathered them all together and reorganized them, 40 of them, into the literature of a perfect science of consciousness, his Vedic science, containing within it the technologies of health and architecture and agriculture and education. And we know all the different Vedic values that Maharishi brought back, and especially of Jyotish and Yagya. He brought it all back, the whole Vedic civilization Maharishi brought back in the world. And he restored the role of the Vedic pundits. The importance of the Vedic pundits in performing the constitution of the universe is it has to be done from the home of Ved, the home of the constitution of the universe, in the transcendent itself. We all are aware Ved is the eternal reverberation of consciousness, of the unified field. That's where it is. And if you have Vedic pundits who have never experienced that level, their performance will not be effective. So the key thing for a Maharishi Vedic pundit in the performance of Yagya and of all the invocations, they have to be established, or at least rising in establishment in the transcendent, where the Ved is. At one time in India, there was a great leader of the Hindu faith in India who took some of us to his home. And he had modeled something after what Maharishi had done in Maharishi reviving. Hundreds of thousands of people have been trained, pundits have been trained in Maharishi Vedic punditry, as it were. And this man had followed the example, but no transcendence. And they were reciting, and they were excellent. They were just in time and very ideal, I'm sure, in their pronunciation. But it had a sort of lifeless air about it. It was so different from hearing the Maharishi Vedic pundits that we hear. Because no transcendence, without transcendence at the basis of the recitation, the effect cannot be there. That's because that's where the Ved is, and that is the level of infinite correlation that connects the whole world. So Vedic pundits, thousands of miles away, through sankalp, through a resolution, can hit the target anywhere on earth because of that connection at the transcendental level. Without that, the whole thing had fallen into ineffectiveness, and people found it hard to believe in the reality of it anymore. But when performed from that transcendental reality, its nourishing influence, the Vedic recitation, transforms through its nourishing influence, individual and collective destiny. This is the power. Maharishi brought all of that back. The proper routine of his Vedic pundits, which includes Trikal Sandhya Vandan, the 3-time daily performance at dawn, noon, and sunset, that is key to a Vedic pundit really being a Vedic pundit, but especially that they are yogic flyers and that they live a Vedic life, Vedic food, Vedic everything. Maharishi brought that back. And Maharishi cognized, and I've used this word, I think this is the right word, cognized. Otherwise, where did it come from? He knew all of this about the Veda, just incredible things that he unfolded quietly without ever sort of hinting how he knew. And the reality is he knew because this was his experience. There's no other explanation. He cognized the eternal structure of the Veda in his Aparashaya Bhashya, showing the finest details of the structure of the Veda, of the nature of the Veda, which is both infinite silence and infinite dynamism, unfolding in a perfect sequence. So this Maharishi brought out, and it'll be interesting during these days that we'll be gathering to look at some of the incredible things that nobody had known, had talked about in centuries or millennia, that Maharishi saw. He saw the reality, like Madhu Chandas, the first seer of the Rig Veda saw it. Maharishi saw the reality. It's what he said in those last talks. He said, I have to attend to Gyan Shakti, to the power of silence, of total knowledge. And all I have to do is give attention to it. And then the whole lotus blossom of total knowledge will unfold at that level. And all I have to do, I don't have to do anything to it. I just have to see it and describe it. See it and describe it. This is Maharishi revealing. He's seeing all of these things that he revealed to us. But another fascinating thing of Maharishi was that he actually made it possible for anyone to experience the zooming forth of the Vedic impulses. You know that this is a key feature of the Invincible America Assembly. And Maharishi gave the expression, even when the Super Radiance program began here, Creating Coherence program in 1979, Maharishi already was saying that it's just Yo Jagat Tamricha Kamayante. For those who are awake, the riches zoom forth in their awareness. And this is more and more the reality of those who are having the most advanced experiences. This is through the experience of Kaivalya, which is the goal of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This is the singularity state of awareness. And totally familiar with that. And then the riches of the Veda will start to zoom forth. And this is available now in this age. It was not available, who knows since when. It's available through the practice of the Transcendental Meditation City program that Maharishi brought to light from the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And Maharishi, with Tony Nader, MD, PhD, M-A-R-R, or as we know him, Maharaj Adiraj Rajaram, revealed that human physiology is a replica of Veda. And not only that, the whole universe is inside every human physiology. This Maharishi was so thrilled by because it gave a basis in the integration of modern science and his Vedic science for the transformation of the entire world, because it means that every individual ever born on earth is equally a cosmic individual. It doesn't matter where a person is born, when a person is born. The physiology with which they are born is Veda. is totality of natural law, is the universe. Everyone, every religion, every race, every nationality, on this level, we are all exactly the same. So this in itself is a unifying value of the whole human race. But it also reveals the bright future of the human race when this is the design potentiality of everyone born in this earth. And of course, the key element for that is consciousness-based education to allow every child to grow up without stress and rise to live at this level in higher states of consciousness where they are a walking, talking Ved, where they are the constitution of the universe functioning in the world and enjoying the full support of total natural law for every desire on earth to be fulfilled. Maharishi also taught the world to fly, to hop at first and thrill the transcendental bliss. And at the same time as he introduced that knowledge, he showed the world the miraculous power of the group dynamics of consciousness. That means collective practice of his transcendental meditation and TM City program, including yogic flying. This group dynamics of consciousness is an incredible thing. We have to realize. It means even a few thousand enlightened people can change the destiny of millions or even billions of people. And this is a reality, it's a fact. And what is interesting to reflect on here is, this will be one thing that we can discuss more, is when you think about action, you know there's a rule of action that as you sow, so shall you reap. So this is a very deep point, both for individuals. You know, you did something and it's going to come back to you from the universe, but also for collections of individuals, like nations. Something has been done, it will come back inevitably. So we had thought. But Maharishi, unfolding the greatest secrets of Vedic wisdom, of the unfathomable ocean of Vedic wisdom, has shown that you can change the destiny created by your past actions as individuals or nations. Another phenomenal change, not only in understanding, but in the possibilities of human life. This is a huge thing. And how it works is a very critical point of understanding how time itself is changing. And of course, related to this, we come to Maharishi Jyotish and Maharishi Yagya. This is the only secret in nature, this collective practice, which can, of yoga and yagya, the two together ideally, which can transform the age of suffering into heaven on earth. It's the greatest secret. Small number of people can trigger a complete change in the destiny of the world. And that is what is happening. To whatever degree we can do it, we're doing it all over the world and here. One thing that I think also, really a very important development of Maharishi that it's good to be aware of, is that he had only global sankalpa. You know, this is, when you think about, sankalpa means his resolution. When he started the movement, what did he call it? Spiritual regeneration of the whole world, spiritual regeneration movement for the entire world. So here he is, one person in Chennai in India, and he's experienced the benefit of transcendental meditation for groups all over India. So he just suddenly comes out of his mouth when he's speaking to the gathering in Chennai, 31st of December 1957. With this, we could spiritually regenerate the whole world. And then everyone applauds, and then Maharishi says to the man keeping the tent, where they're all gathered, he says, can you keep the tent another day? And the next day he makes a resolution, 1st of January 1958, to spiritually regenerate the whole world. This is one person wanting to do that. So this is one example, but everything he did, his resolution is not for peace in some area, it's for perpetual world peace. It's not for improvement of health, it's for a completely disease-free world and the end to all human suffering. His resolution is for the dawn of a golden age, heaven on earth, for everyone in the world. This is Maharishi. You could never limit his vision and his desires for the human race. Now only, not only now, but for all the future generations he was resolving as well. For Maharishi, the world is my family. From his level of Brahmi Chaitanya unity consciousness, this was the all-time reality he was living. He just lived like that. He's concerned for the entire world. His goal for the world was so big, it was inconceivable to others. But he was invincible in his resolution, knowing the power of the knowledge Gurudev had bestowed on him. The question I pose to you now, who in the depth of Kali Yuga, the age of ignorance, with all that was going on in the world at that moment, who announces the coming of a golden age of Sat Yuga, the golden age of the human race? Who would do such a thing? You know, in the worst time, saying, okay, now the best time is coming. This is who? And only him. He is the only one. And it was so many times, I'm sure all of you could relate times like this, when Maharishi would have some huge plan. I remember in Salisbury in 1973, after the world plan had been formulated by Maharishi, there were vast charts on the walls with 3,600 cities of the world, in which there would be a world plan center, one for every 1 million people in the world. And they were absolutely distributed, you know, in China and the Soviet Union and everywhere. And people, you know, I heard people saying that, you know, it's ridiculous. Now we can't go into China or the Soviet Union or those places. And, you know, it's a fantasy. But Maharishi completely would reject such an idea. He's thinking for the globe, for the whole human race. He is making a resolution for the bright future of everybody on earth, not for some place where it's convenient. He has to take into account the entire world. It's just his nature completely in unity consciousness. Take care of the entire world. He was that kind of teacher in the world, taking care of the entire human race. And I feel as if Maharishi's action, this is my opinion, is what you could call yogic, meaning that his own planning of the world was in itself a motivator of the change of the world. He couldn't restrict his thinking. I remember when he was working on agriculture projects, he would never think in units of less than 1 million hectares, which is the size of a small country, you know, but it's a huge thing. But Maharishi would pour his attention into these vast global enterprises because his own thinking had to be on that level for its immediate effect from the level of the transcendent. What happened there? Somehow it disappeared. So, yogic, his own planning was one of the motivators of change. And he couldn't limit it. could not limit it. And when people would say to Maharishi, "Oh, Maharishi, it's too much, you're going too fast. Try to get this done or that done, but don't talk about all of these huge things that you want to." And Maharishi used to tell them, "I can't wait for anyone. I can't wait for anyone." He had those 53 years to do it in, even doing triple, like he would do triple the number of working hours in a day that any of us could ever do. But even so, it was all urgent to Maharishi. Every step, he had to do this one and this one and this one and this one, and to complete his designed duty to Gurudev by the time he was no more able to be with us. So the other thing about it is that by providing these plannings for the world, like his master plan to create heaven on earth, like his plan to reconstruct every house in the world, every building in the world, a $30 trillion project. He left a blueprint of what was necessary if the world was to be really a bright, happy place for everyone born now and in the future. So he couldn't wait for anyone. He couldn't wait for those who told him, "No, you're going too fast. You can't do this thing. You have to stick with the things you're doing." This was Maharishi's great independence of thought. I experienced right from the very beginning of my time on teacher training this phenomenon of how Maharishi viewed the world. In those days, there were only like 300 teachers of transcendental meditation in the world. But Maharishi still had this completely global perspective, and I've mentioned to you all in the past that I was so amazed when I joined teacher training to find that Maharishi never did anything else morning to night except work for the welfare of the entire world. That was all he did. So that was the thing. But people would sometimes say to him, "Oh, Maharishi, I want to stay with you in your ashram in Rishikesh." This was at a time when actually Maharishi was not expected to leave India again. When he came back in 1969, the idea was he'd just do a few more teacher training courses and then he'd go back to Udakashi, to the Valley of the Saints, and retire into silence again there. But so people just wanted to stay with him. They didn't want to go away from him. But his reply was, "The world is my ashram, not this one small set of buildings. The world is my ashram." And that's how he lived and worked. The whole world was his field of operation. Great teachers teach individuals to rise in enlightenment throughout the history of the world. But the greatest of teachers take care of nations and the whole world population. So this is Maharishi, and it is such a rare happening in human history that there is such a world teacher. And our good fortune is so great as to be born in such a time when there is such a teacher as that, and to know it and to enjoy it. Maharishi also demonstrated the teaching of transcendence at the core of every religion, and thus demonstrated the unity of all religions and the unity of science and religion at the level of transcendence, at the level of the unified field of natural law. In a waking, sleep, dream, consciousness world, he brought the knowledge and experience of 7 states of consciousness at a time when even the existence of consciousness was doubted, truly, in academic and scientific circles. He was undeterred by anything in the world, not minding anything that was said or done, or the depth of ignorance, or the Cold War, or anything. Always treading on the soft ground of the grace of Gurudev, and drawn on from city to city by the destiny of the people in that city to experience transcendence. He turned the tide of time. But he said, it was not I who did all of this, or if it was I, it was the big I. He was searching at those last days from where all of this came, this huge phenomenon of knowledge and transformation. And he said it came from everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. In other words, the whole thing that he did came from Brahm itself. So when we ask what Maharishi did in the world, he expressed the reality of Brahm. The only explanation that Maharishi said of how this was possible was the nature of the guide we have. Gurudev Brahmananda Saraswati. But it needed a pure, innocent channel for Brahm totality to flow into the daily living of the world. And that pure channel was Maharishi. Maharishi in the world, 1955 to 2008. From the moment of his seeing the flash of the headlights on Gurudev's face and Maharishi's heart was surrendered, the whole thing that he did unfolded spontaneously. This will be a key element in what we understand during these days. It spontaneously unfolded, motivated by total natural law, by Brahm. And all that he did, he offered humbly at the feet of his master, always saying, Jai Gurudev. So this is Maharishi, and we look forward to these coming sessions when we can look together with your insights also into the reality of what Maharishi did in the world. Jai Gurudev. If there are some insights that you would like to give now, is there a microphone that could be, if anyone would like to add? Obviously, your immediate reaction is, what about this, what about that that he did? And I'm sure that we'll all enjoy going into everything that he did that you can also think of. But please go ahead if there's anything you would like to add.
Is this working? Yes.
Jai Gurudev. One time in Flow Drop in 1992 or 93, I was called to the Maharishi Secretary office in the old building, and they gave me a Jyotish chart, the Maharishi Secretary, and he said, Maharishi wants you to have this. And after I looked at it, I realized it was Maharishi's chart. But the title was Ram Raj Samkalpa. That was the name on the chart. To fulfill Ram Raj. And that, of course, was Gurudev's boyhood name. And so Maharishi said that was his life, was just to fulfill what Gurudev brought out. And so I just thought it was a beautiful point.
It's a beautiful point Dr. Bonchev makes. And I think one of the interesting elements of this, we all have probably asked ourselves quietly, who was Maharishi exactly? And I think we can only consider Maharishi and Gurudev together. They go together because Gurudev was, as we heard, the legendary sage, like a legendary sage of Upanishadic fame, was walking the earth again. And Maharishi searched and found him, and within 2 years gained enlightenment at the feet of his master. And then in the subsequent 10 years he was with Gurudev, he received the entire constitution of the universe. And as he said also, Gurudev designed him to go out. One of the very interesting things I think about this, you have to ask the question, when Maharishi saw Gurudev that night on the terrace in this house, he immediately said he just wanted to surrender and just join and be permanently with Gurudev right then. And Gurudev says to him, well, what are you doing now? This is what Maharishi said, Gurudev said to him. And he said, well, I'm a student, you know. And Gurudev says, so finish your studies. Now, that in itself is a very revealing remark, because why should Gurudev care whether he finished his studies? Gurudev lives in the jungle, you know, where the lions and the sun never reaches the ground, and caves and all of that. What does he care about whether somebody completes a degree in physics at the University of Allahabad? But if we think about what Maharishi had to do, then it's completely understandable. Because Maharishi had to go out, and his education was in English, the English language, and he had to go out and speak, and he had to speak in scientific terms all over the world. So I would say that that was the first indication of Gurudev designing Maharishi. He says, this is the expression Maharishi used, Gurudev designed a life to take this to the entire world. So that was the reality, that from birth with Maharishi's, like he said, a thirsty man arrives at a well. He was longing, as Gurudev also before him had longed for a great master, and found his master, Swami Krishnananda Saraswati, in the Udakashi, in the Valley of the Saints. So Maharishi is born and driven towards enlightenment, meets Gurudev, and then Gurudev brings him to that state and of preparedness to then take the enlightenment of Gurudev to every corner of the world. It's not just kind of accidental, though, in my opinion. The whole thing is completely set from that moment of birth. The whole thing is designed. And Gurudev and Maharishi together, it came at a time when the world, as Maharishi said about this designing a life part, that at that time when Gurudev was born, 1868, there was a tremendous increase in dynamism in the world at that time, in industry and communications and warfare and all of these things moving in a different way. And Maharishi had described how Gurudev was in his silence in the Amarkantak, in the remote fasts of the Vindhya range of central India, himself in that incredible silence that he generated. He was an underpinning of world consciousness even then. But then that had to be taken out from the forests, from the caves, and brought to all corners of the world. And this was the purpose of Maharishi coming, in my view, and of his thirsting for enlightenment and meeting Gurudev and then being sent. And you will see another part of that is that when Maharishi says goodbye to Gurudev, he goes to the Himalayas. He intends to just go into silence. But it is not the destiny of him or of the world that should be the case. And this overwhelming impulse comes in him to come out to Rameshwaram and then Kanyakumari and Trivandrum, and then he starts teaching. So the whole thing is a plan on the level of the destiny of the human race. One of my favorite things that Maharishi has said at different times is he would thank Gurudev, for everything at the Guru Purnima celebration. And then he would say, and thank you to time. It's an interesting remark. Thank you to time, because this is the time when, this is the Maharishi Gurudev time, when the knowledge to change the destiny of the world reached every corner of the world and is reaching it more and more, even as we speak, through all of the teaching of all of our governors all over the world. So yes, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, and just one
it's
real
all
quick
in the
thing
destiny of that.
is that the thought that brought Maharishi out of Uttarkashi was the thought of Ram, Rameshwaram. So that was the Ram Raj Sankalpa. And one very quick story here. So when I was in Flodrop one time meeting one-on-one with Maharishi on the Maharishi Vedic Universities, something came up and he said, Bevan. And he just was silent for a moment and he looked at me and he said, Bevan should always be on top.
Just one remark about that. You know, there was a time around one of the Guru Purnima celebrations when Maharishi had a theme. You know, he was coming out every day almost. There was a new theme when he, came out. It was like, how about this? So, but there was one particular thing he was working on at the time, and so I was listening and taking notes, and I took all of the different expressions, and when I had to speak on Guru Purnima to summarize the nature of the day in the opening of it, I just said all of these expressions, that I'd written down that Maharishi had said about this theme. And so I just did that, and it was a very blissful experience to just say exactly the words Maharishi had been using. And after the celebration, probably you've heard me tell this story, but after the celebration, Maharishi said, "Oh, you were so brilliant today." And I said, "Yes, but Maharishi, all I was doing was repeating your words, like that." He said, "Exactly." So that's the way for us all to be on top, is just to do that. Yes, one last one, and then we should rest.
I just wanted to share a comment that I heard 3 years ago. I had just come out of Brahmistan of India, and I was at an event, and just want to share what the world thinks of Maharishi. And I was at that event, and then it was a nice event. It was chaired by an ex-justice of the Supreme Court of India. And also in attendance was the person who is the head of Maharishi Sandeepani Sansthan. That's an organization in India that funds all the Vedic events on behalf of the federal government. And so I was sitting with him for lunch. I was one of the speakers there. And I was sharing with him, "Oh, do you know Maharishi University?" And, this and that. I was naming the names which I thought he would know, including this and that. So he cut me short, and he says, no, not just one. So many people like Deepak Chopra and others have come and gone, but I'll tell you one thing. And he said, spontaneously, without anything that he needed to do, he said, if there's anybody who has understood Vedas truly since Adi Shankara, it is Maharishi. So that's just very off-the-cuff comment he made to me, and I said, that's beautiful. Thank you. I want to share.
So some will say that it'll be very hard for us in our generation to truly comprehend who Maharishi is and what he actually did. So we'll give it a shot, but we have to realize the magnitude of the subject is so huge, but it's just bliss to think about it at least. So thank you all for coming, and I hope to see many of you again on Thursday, right? Jai Gurudev. 7:45 on Thursday, 7:45.